welcome everyone. My name is Kerry Roberts. I'm representing the Strategic Studies Department here at Joint Special Operations University. Today we are pleased to present a distinguished speaker, including audience Q&A. This session is unclassified and will be recorded and posted to the JSOU network. Please keep in mind, the views and opinions expressed by all participants do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policy of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, or U.S. SOCOM. If you have questions after this session, please email thinkjsou@socom.mil as indicated on the slide. Since unsettled weather is always a possibility, if you lose connection, just rejoin the session. If the internet fails you, you can always dial in with the phone numbers on your registration confirmation email. Today's moderator is Mr. Jack Guy, faculty here at JSOU University. He will introduce this program and today's guests.
Thank you, Kerry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jack Guy, and I'm an adjunct instructor at the Joint Special Operations University located in Tampa, Florida. I want to welcome everyone to another online interview of Think JSOU. Think JSOU is an ongoing series that explores research and publications of the JSOU faculty, resident senior fellows, leading academics, and the wider SOF and international security community. The online collection includes interviews and conversations with authors and researchers and is intended to supplement existing publications, articles, and other active discussions. We encourage everyone to explore the complete Think JSOU collection by reviewing our online offerings on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the All Partner Access Network, or APAN. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Barry Strauss, an expert on ancient military history. Dr. Strauss has written or edited numerous books and articles, including the Battle of Salamis, the Trojan War, the Spartacus War, Masters of Command, and the Death of Caesar. He is a former director of Cornell's Judith Reppe Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies, where he studied modern engagements from Bosnia to Iraq and from Afghanistan to Europe. He is an expert on military strategy in that vein. He is currently director as well as founder of Cornell's program on freedom and free societies, which investigates challenges to constitutional liberty at home and abroad. As an interesting byline, Dr. Strauss was named an honorary citizen of Salamis, Greece for his book, The Battle of Salamis, the naval encounter that saved Greece and Western civilization, which was named one of the best books of 2004 by the Washington Post. Dr. Strauss's work focuses on strategy as well as leadership, and he spent last year on sabbatical at the Naval Postgraduate School. Dr. Strauss, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for helping us connect the modern to the ancient. I know that you have a brief presentation, so let us allow you to introduce your topic and then open the door to questions for the remainder of the session. To the audience, you can ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of the page. Would you please mute your computers at this time? Dr. Strauss.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Guy. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a great audience and really looking forward to our conversation and to your questions. I'm going to go directly to sharing my screen now. And great. Okay, as you can see, my topic is War in a Tough Neighborhood, the Mediterranean then and now. As Mr. Guy said, I'm an expert, I'm a historian of ancient warfare, and I try always to keep in mind what the lessons might be for us today. So the Mediterranean, you'll all be familiar with it. You can see it in this slide. Many Europeans, Northern Europeans, think of the Mediterranean as a vacation land, and it certainly has some beautiful beaches and resorts. But it is also an area of conflict from ancient times till today, with conflicts ongoing as we speak. The Mediterranean is a fascinating place, an inland sea, and the only place in the temperate zone where 3 continents meet, Africa, Asia, and Europe. And so it's a meeting place, but also a place for conflict. So I think that from the point of view of ancient history, the Mediterranean is best known as an area of great power competition. From the Peloponnesian War to the Punic War, to the wars between Rome and Parthia and Sasania, to the wars between the Arabs and the Byzantines, and so on and so forth down to modern times. But the fact of the matter is that it was also an area of special operations. And there's no period of antiquity, no matter how intense the great power conflict, in which special operations weren't going on. So we could begin with one of the most famous incidents in Western literature, the Trojan Horse, the legendary means by which the Greeks, who'd been fighting at Troy for 10 years, the legendary means by which they finally took the city. You're all familiar with the story of how the Greeks hid in a horse. The Greeks' army left their camp outside of Troy. They pretended to have gone home, and they'd only gone to a nearby island. They had a few warriors in this horse. The Trojans, unsure what to do, finally let the horse in the city, and then the Greeks were able to open the gates. The army came back by sea at night, and they massacred the Trojans. This, of course, is a legend, though it might be based in truth. What isn't a legend is we have a number of other examples of early warfare in which the attackers were unable to take a city by siege, and so they resorted to tricks in order to win, pretending to leave, in one occasion dressing up like the enemy in the enemy's uniforms. There are a variety of stratagems that were used. If we zip ahead a few centuries to the Peloponnesian War, the great war between Athens and Sparta and their two alliances for control of the Greek world, of course, there were famous battles, famous set battles, pitched battles, but there are also a number of special operations. My favorite example is a Spartan named Brasidas, not as famous as Leonidas, the leader of the 300, the group that fought to the last man and died rather than give in to the Persians. But Brasidas was no less brave. He went from Sparta and traveled overland through central Greece to northeastern Greece with a force of 1,700 men, including 700 helots, those are serfs, and 1,000 mercenaries. He had no full Spartans with him. And he attacked Athenian allies, Athenian cities in northeastern Greece, taking most of them through a combination of diplomacy and cunning. In some cases, he spoke to the people and offered them an alliance and threatened to destroy their economy, ravage their lands if they didn't give in. In one very dramatic case, he managed to take a city that had been garrisoned by Athenian troops. He entered the city with only 7 men armed with daggers. They were able to get inside, open the gates. 100 light armed troops came in, and this was at nighttime. And they were able to make havoc of the enemy and take the town. Going ahead from to Roman times, in the famous Second Punic War, Hannibal's invasion of Italy, one of the best known battles of the ancient world, the Battle of Cannae. But the Romans bounced back by not only beating Hannibal on the battlefield, but also by using cunning and special operations. The most intriguing of which is Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus because of his victory. He managed to take the Carthaginian capital in Spain, most important Carthaginian province, the city of New Carthage, now Cartagena, Spain, by having his men scale the walls in a lagoon at low tide, where the defenders had never expected that anyone would be able to take the walls at that place. Tremendous blow to Carthage by losing its capital city and also losing the treasury that it had stored there. Earlier, I have these in wrong chronological order, but earlier, Alexander the Great, also famous for his great victories in battle, in pitched battle. He was a cavalryman. He came from Macedonia in northern Greece, and the Macedonians were great mountain fighters. And they used their mountain fighting skills to tremendous effect as they went eastward in Asia. You know, they invaded the Persian Empire in what is nowadays northwestern Turkey, and worked their way through the Middle East all the way eastward to Central and South Asia. They had a great deal of mountain fighting there, particularly in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. And Alexander and his men managed to take a number of rock fortresses where their enemies had dug in because they thought they were impregnable. But Alexander's mountain fighters were able to do so under difficult conditions in the snow and at night. Finally, the Battle of Actium. This is one of the most famous and also legendary battles of the ancient world. September 2nd, 31 BC in northwestern Greece. It pitted the naval forces of Octavian, later Augustus, against those of Antony and Cleopatra. And Octavian won, thereby ensuring that the future of the Roman Empire would be in the west, in Rome, rather than the east, in Alexandria, Egypt. But the battle was only the tail end of a campaign. The campaign had gone on for 6 months, and it began when Octavian's best general, Agrippa, shocked the enemy by launching an assault behind enemy lines in southwestern Greece, far from where anyone expected him, capturing a fortified supply base, the most important supply base in Antony and Cleopatra's lines. It was defended by a veteran commander who should have known what he was doing, but the surprise was so great that Agrippa, Octavian's forces, took the place and cut off the supply chain to Antony and Cleopatra's troops. A series of victories followed, and by the time the Battle of Actium was fought, Antony and Cleopatra's sailors were starving, which is one of the reasons why they lost. If we look at this map, you can see some of the places I've been talking about. So here is Rome. Carthage is located here. Troy and the Trojan Horse over here. Sparta down here in southern Greece, and Brasidas marched overland all the way through central Greece up here to northeastern Greece, where he had his victories. New Carthage, modern Cartagena, is over here. The Battle of Actium, 31 BC, took place here. The supply chain that fed Antony and Cleopatra's troops went all the way down the west coast of Greece to the island of Crete, and then down here to Alexandria, Egypt. When Agrippa, Octavian's general, launched his attack, his unexpected attack in Antony's rear, he took this place here. It's not on the map. It's called Methone, and that was the key supply place where Antony, that was essential for feeding Antony and Cleopatra's men, was taken by this really shocking attack by Octavian's forces that won the day. If we had more time, we could also talk about one of the most famous ambushes that ever took place in ancient times. It's the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, where the German forces under Arminius ambushed and shocked the Roman legions, destroyed 3 Roman legions, and pretty much ended Rome's plan to conquer Germany as far east as the Elbe River. So those are some examples of special operations in ancient warfare. The Eastern Mediterranean remains an area of conflict today. At the current moment, there's a threatened conflict over natural gas supplies in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the area off Cyprus, and oil supplies as well. And also, as you know, there's a conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the disputed area of Nagorno-Karabakh. So this map may, I suspect that it's more confusing than it's helpful, but you get some sense that there are overlapping claims as to who controls the important access to oil and gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey has a very long continental coastline and feels it gives it a moral and practical claim to some share of the fossil fuels. Greece has a number of islands, and in particular, the small island here of Castellorizo, an island that Cleopatra coveted, by the way, which, according to the law of the Sea Treaty, by one interpretation, would give Greece sole control of the natural gas in the area. The Turks have disputed this and have sent in a survey ship with an armed escort, leading to Greek response and French ships coming in as well. French warships coming in as well. The Turks had earlier claimed an exclusive zone in Libya. Greece has support from such allies as Israel and the United Arab Emirates. And complicated as well by the fact that Cyprus is divided, but there being a Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus that's recognized by very few countries other than Turkish, and the Greek-speaking Republic of Cyprus to the south, and much of the oil and gas is located off Cyprus. In the Caucasus, the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia over this disputed territory, with Turkey and Israel supporting Azerbaijan, and Russia and Iran supporting Armenia. So this is a very serious conflict as well. Now, I wanted to turn to some lessons that I think we can get from Augustus, earlier Octavian, one of the most famous and most successful leaders of the ancient Mediterranean. And I want to talk about three things in particular. Augustus knew when to fight and when not to fight. Let me go back to the maps. So as a young man, Augustus was, his claim to fame was that his great uncle was Julius Caesar. When Augustus was 18, we'll call him Octavian then, he had been sent by Caesar to a Roman military base here in the east, near Dyrrhachium, to prepare for an expedition to the east, a great military expedition for the east, and for Octavian to learn the ropes of how to become a Roman military commander. Meanwhile, in Rome, it was 44 BC, and Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March. Octavian got the news, and his friends urged him to launch a military coup on the eastern side of the Adriatic Sea, and then to come back and march on Rome. Octavian thought otherwise. He knew the time was not right to do this, and he knew that he had to move slowly and cautiously. So he sailed back to Italy surreptitiously. The biggest city, the natural place to land was at Brindisium, modern Brindisi, but rather than do that, he landed to the south on an unoccupied beach and slowly and cautiously made his way back towards Rome, making sure that he had the allies that would support him before he launched his political career that ultimately made him Rome's first emperor, the Emperor Augustus. Now, if we fast forward to the time of the conflict with Antony and Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, at this point, Octavian knew to behave, not to behave cautiously, but rather to behave with audacity. At this point, he agreed to Agrippa's plan to send a fleet across the Ionian Sea in the month of March, which is the very beginning of the sailing season, when the sea was still rough. The fleet had favorable winds, but it had to go surreptitiously along these islands to Methone in Antony and Cleopatra's rear. There's also the possibility that they sailed first to Sicily and then took an even more dangerous trip across the Ionian Sea here, across the open sea. That would guarantee that they wouldn't be caught by the enemy, and they have the advantage of surprise, but it did run the risk of losing the ships at sea. In either case, they took a risk, they employed audacity, and they won. So one of the reasons for Octavian's success is he knew when to be cautious and when to be audacious. Second reason for his success was he knew how to work with a number two. Octavian himself, the future Augustus, was not a great commander. He was not a natural general. He fought in battle, he had courage, he was wounded, but he's just not a great military commander. The person who was a great military commander was someone who was his childhood friend, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. And a key to Octavian's success is that he manages his relationship with Agrippa carefully. He allows Agrippa to be a commander. Agrippa won at Methone and at Actium, and he also won in a series of naval battles off Sicily before the Actium War. There was always a risk in the ancient world that if somebody else was fighting fewer battles for you, that person might turn around and depose you, might march on Rome and get rid of you. And it's a tribute to Octavian's real political success and his ability to manage relationships that he had the successful career-long relationship with Agrippa. He knew how to manage Agrippa so that Agrippa would fight for Octavian without fighting against Octavian. Ultimately, he took Agrippa into his own family. He married his daughter, his one and only birth child. He married his daughter to Agrippa, and they had a series of grandchildren who Octavian was hoping would ultimately be his heirs. He adopted two of the grandsons. It didn't work out. They died young, as people often did in the ancient world. But this ability to manage his relationship with someone so that you have a team of Octavian and Agrippa, it's key to the success of the Emperor Augustus, and indeed to Rome's success in this period. And then the third thing that I want to mention about Octavian is he was a master of information operations. Nobody did it better than he did. And let me just give you a few examples. First of all, his name. If it confuses you that I'm referring to him as Octavian, but he's also the Emperor Augustus, it should confuse you, because he's a fellow whose name changed throughout his life. He was born Gaius Octavius from a wealthy but not noble family. As I mentioned, his great uncle on his mother's side was Julius Caesar, the first man in Rome. After Caesar was assassinated, Caesar's will was opened, and it showed that he had posthumously adopted his great-nephew Octavius as his son. Octavius accepted the adoption, and he changed his name to Gaius Julius Caesar. And then a few years later, he had Caesar declared a god. So he was able to change his name to Gaius Julius Caesar Divi Filius, Gaius Julius Caesar, the son of a god. And then finally, after he defeated Antony and Cleopatra, and he became the unchallenged leader of Rome, he didn't call himself a dictator. That was the title that had gotten his great uncle Caesar assassinated. Nor did he call himself a king, which would have been unacceptable to the Romans. He called himself the first citizen, or the first man. And he arranged for the Senate to give him an honorary title. The honorary title was the Reverend. And the Reverend in Latin is Augustus. And that's why we call him the Emperor Augustus. Now, as far as the Actium War goes, the Actium War is one in which was a civil war in which Octavian fought against the Roman who was allied with and married to Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, the ruler of the Roman East, while Octavian ruled the Roman West. But he knew that it would not go over well in Italy to admit that he was fighting a civil war against a fellow Roman. So instead, Octavian declared war on Cleopatra. He said that it was a foreign war against a foreign country, and Egypt at this point was an independent kingdom and not part of the Roman Empire. And by doing this, on the one hand, Octavian fooled no one. Everyone knew he was fighting a war against his fellow Romans under Mark Antony. But on the other hand, he made it possible for people to swallow what was going on. He made it possible for them to accept that Octavian was reopening the wounds of civil war. Again, he was a master of information operations, information warfare. And if we were to look at the rest of his career more closely, we would see how he continued to use information to be successful. So that's my talk. I'll leave you with this image of Octavian, who always liked to show himself as a young man, even though he lived and ruled Rome into his 70s. So thank you, and I'd be delighted to take questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Strauss. I'm interested in your take on leadership issues.
Yes.
In the ancient world, and I'm wondering who do you see as the great leaders of the time periods you were talking about, and why? And then I'd like to shift that to strategy and strategic thinking,
sure,
as well, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So in terms of pure leadership, how would you grade the people in these time periods that you looked at?
Well, there are some great examples of leadership, of course. I mean, if we go back to the Trojan War, you get Achilles, who's a heroic leader and who leads by example on the battlefield. And then you get Odysseus, who, although a great warrior, mostly leads through cunning and his ability to come up with stratagems like the Trojan Horse. Though he, almost all these ancient generals had to walk the walk. None of them led from behind. Hannibal, the Carthaginian, one of the great leaders, famous for sharing the hardships of his men. And one of the only leaders who's active in ancient warfare for a long period, who never has to face a mutiny. His army is in Italy for over 15 years, but his men, even though they have harsh conditions, never mutiny because he knows how to handle them so well. Caesar, another great leader, he does have to face mutinies. He's also a great battlefield leader, but he is a politician as well. I mean, one of Caesar's skills is that in addition to being a great general and a very brave one, he wins Rome's second highest military decoration at a very young age by his distinguished combat in a battle in the Greek East. So he's got that. So distinguished, in fact, that when he enters a room, Roman senators all have to stand to recognize him. But in addition to being a doughty warrior, he's also a great speaker. He's one of the greatest orators that Rome ever had. So he's a terrific politician and a very cunning one, but also a terrific writer. He writes military classics. They're still read today the Gallic War and the Civil War. And he writes other books that didn't survive. So that's part of his leadership as well. We must also mention Alexander, who is a superb warrior, a great horseman, very clever in fighting his battles. Also knows his limitations, like Octavian. When Alexander becomes king at the age of 20, because his father is assassinated, and Alexander knows enough not to kill off all of his father's generals. He knows that he still needs some of the veteran generals because he's too young. He doesn't really know how to win battles without them. He eventually does kill them off after he succeeds. But he's always in the field like Hannibal. He shares the hardships of his men. And like Caesar, he is a great diplomat and a great image maker, somebody who knows how to use his own image, and constantly negotiating with the people whom he conquers. It's never his idea that you come in and you crush everyone. Rather, you come in, you defeat them, and then you make friends with the locals. So I think these are some of the skills that made them great leaders.
And in terms of strategic thinking, what do you see in their capabilities as leaders to also see things strategically?
So Alexander is a very interesting case. He wanted to conquer the Persian Empire. He didn't. To do that, he needed to defeat them on land and at sea, and he had a number of handicaps. So his great ace was that he had, man for man, the best army in the world, and it was a very versatile army. First of all, it was one of the few successful combined armed militaries in the ancient world. In spite of the poor communications, they are able to use infantry and cavalry in combination, in tandem in battles. Secondly, they had a lot of additional skills. As I said, they're terrific mountain fighters, and they're able to do commando operations, and they are also good at siegecraft. They don't have any money, though. They're absolutely broke. And they don't have supplies to feed them long in any enemy territory. They're depending on the fact that the enemy, A, is not going to adopt the scorched earth strategy, and B, is going to do them the favor of fighting set battles. And in fact, both of those things happen. The other problem is, although Alexander has a navy, it is thoroughly unreliable. It is made up of Greek city-states who were forced into becoming his father's allies, defeated in battle. And he knows that they will betray him given the first opportunity. So he's also counting on Persia not to attack him at sea, not to send a fleet across the Greek islands to the Greek mainland. In other words, for Alexander to succeed, Persia has to play into his hands. And it does. It does. He's partly lucky, but he partly knows his enemy. And the other thing I should say to Alexander's credit, I don't want to make it seem as if it's all just luck, he does have a strategy for defeating the Persian Navy. So he wants to defeat the Persian Navy by defeating them on land, by taking their naval bases on land by using siegecraft. And that's a very good strategy indeed. It works. Not easy to win these sieges, but it allows him to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I can go on and on about ancient strategy.
We can come to that. We have a couple of questions. Let's see if we can get into those. A question, in your studies, what lessons learned do we have from Alexander the Great and his successes in Afghanistan? Any that come to mind?
Yes. So, he had to be willing to, in Afghanistan, he had to be willing to stay there over the long term to meet the challenges there. He also had, so for one thing, as I said, he had the advantage that he already was very skilled at mountain fighting. He and his men were already skilled at mountain fighting, so it wasn't that great a challenge for them. He was not limited in brutality. He was not fighting a hearts and minds campaign. Although he certainly wanted to make friends with the locals when he could, he was willing to be quite brutal. So that's very different than contemporary situation in warfare, when we, of course, are not going to be so brutal, only using as much force as necessary. But he was quite willing to do that. The other thing that's kind of interesting about Alexander is that so he combined the carrot and the stick. So he's very brutal and necessary, but was constantly reaching out to locals and making alliances with them. What kind of alliances? Well, he married a local princess. I don't think it gets any more alliancey than that.
Yes, as one would imagine. You mentioned that he knew when to attack and when not to. What some sense of the factors that influenced his decisions?
I was referring to Octavian, but it does refer to Alexander as well.
Okay.
So Alexander, goes down in history as someone who is never defeated, and that's true. But there are a few occasions when he decided the better part of valor was not to attack. There's one place where he begins an attack. There's a fortress in southwestern Turkey where he says, "I don't think so. It's just too strong." So he passes it by. I would say that Alexander, in general, his strong point maybe is not knowing when not to attack. He loves war a little too much, and he's wounded. He suffers a number of wounds on the battlefield, which arguably one of the reasons that he dies just before his 33rd birthday, probably of a virus, although some say poison, arguably is that his body had been beat up so badly at that point that he just didn't have the resistance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You talked about Octavian as a master of information.
Yes.
Is this something that he worked on individually? Did he have a staff that helped him with messaging? Did he really plan through this? What do you think?
Well, he had a staff that helped him. It's certainly not something that he's doing on his own. They send messages out by speeches, by documents, by diplomacy, and by coins. Coins are absolutely key way to get messages out in the ancient world. So he's got people who are minting his coins for him and advising him on that. He learns, as a young man, he learns the family business from great uncle Caesar, who's also a master of messaging. And he learns from Caesar's mistakes. Caesar is assassinated because Caesar doesn't know when to stop. Caesar becomes a dictator for life, something that's never existed in Rome before. Caesar toys with becoming a king by dressing up like the kings of old that they had in Rome. And Caesar has many mistresses. He gets around. His most famous mistress is Cleopatra. And Cleopatra has a son who she names Caesar, claims it was his son. He never disavows it. And how much in Rome's face was it? Very much, because Cleopatra actually came to Rome and Caesar installed her in his villa across the Tiber River, in what's now part of the city of Rome. In those days, it was the suburbs. She was there on the Ides of March. Well, we can only speculate if she had the baby with her. I wouldn't be at all surprised. So this is really in the face of the Romans that Caesar wants to become a king. And Octavian learned, you don't do that. You got to have a different message.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have a question.
Yes.
Concerning Rome and Carthage. The
Yes.
question is, with Rome and Carthage, why was Rome so resolute in not just defeating Carthage, but in destroying them? That it seems that Rome was much more determined in this vein, and that despite many significant setbacks, especially with Hannibal in their own backyard, they doubled down and went after Carthage completely.
So yeah, great question. So as you know, they fought 3 wars against Carthage. And I think part of it was they felt that Carthage was going to come back regardless of what happened. The fact that there were 3 wars. Second, that Hannibal was so dangerous to the Romans that against expectation, he brought the war to Italy and caused a great deal of suffering for Italy. And as he was there in Italy from 218 to 203, so for 15 years, he is encamped in Italy, really causing tremendous challenges and difficulties to the Romans and killing many tens of thousands of Romans and their allies, well over 100,000. So they consider the Carthaginians very dangerous. Two other things. I mean, for one thing, Roman society rewards people for military successes. And so there's always an incentive to fight a war. There's less of an incentive to make peace. Roman society, if you win a certain number of battles, kill a certain number of people, you get to celebrate a triumph, which will make your political career. There's nothing like that for making peace in Roman society. But the final point I want to make is that the Romans practiced genocide. It's not a nice thing to say. It's not a pretty picture. But the Romans felt that when they absolutely had to, they would engage in genocide. They had done it earlier on against a neighboring city called Veii, which is just north of Rome in central Italy. The Romans felt that the only solution for this conflict was to get rid of Veii. So they do. They depopulate Veii and they disappear it as a city. They came to the same conclusion with Carthage, terribly bloody, awful to contemplate, but they came to the conclusion they could never get along with Carthage. They actually gave the Carthaginians an ultimatum. They gave them a choice. We don't want to kill you. We just want to destroy your city and your way of life. So would you please move to the countryside and we'll leave you alone? And the Carthaginians said, get lost. We have a very well-defended city and you're not going to take it. And in fact, it took the Romans 3 years to destroy Carthage. It's not something that that happened easily. But for the Romans, this was the ultimate solution. When all else failed, and if an enemy kept coming back, they would engage in genocide.
Wow, that's a significant end state.
Yeah. Yes.
To move toward. Here's another. Innovation is a popular topic these days, and bringing that innovation to the battlefield gives advantage in certain areas. In addition to having brilliant commanders, are there examples of this innovation upsetting the apple cart, if you will?
Yes.
Weapons, organization, tactics, and so forth.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks. Yeah, there are numerous examples of innovation winning the day. So in the Peloponnesian War, for example, the Athenians are the great naval power, and the Peloponnesians are definitely in second place. But as the war goes on, the Peloponnesians realize that they can have an advantage by thickening the timbers and strengthening the timbers of the prows of their battleships. So prows of their warships, these are galleys, excuse me. The galleys of the time, they have bronze-tipped rams, but they're not strong enough for head-on-head ramming or prow-on-prow ramming. They have to ram the enemy ship in the side. And they can do that, but that requires extremely experienced crews and rowers who can follow commands and helmsmen who can move the ships very quickly and under great pressure in battle. What the Peloponnesians do is they strengthen the bows of their ship, they strengthen the timbers, so they can actually ram them head on. And that gives them a great advantage, allows them to just defeat and destroy the Athenian navy in Syracuse Harbor, which completely destroys the Athenian expedition that had come to try to conquer Sicily and sends them home. So that would be one example of innovation on the battlefield. Another example of innovation a bit later. So Greek infantry battle in the classical period was very unsophisticated. The hoplite phalanx was like two football teams that only had a ground game and not a particularly sophisticated ground game. They couldn't throw the ball. They would just smash into each other, basically. Well, an innovation that they come up with, first the Thebans, and then it becomes more popular, is they make one wing of the phalanx deep. They weaken one wing and they put all their best men in the other wing, and it allows it to punch through the enemy phalanx and then wheel about and attack the enemy in the side. So that would be a pretty simple innovation that allows them to win. The Macedonians under Alexander's father, Philip, what they do is they increase, so Greek infantry armies fought using pikes, about 9 feet long pikes, and they carried heavy body shields to protect themselves. These were citizen armies, and individual citizens had a lot of say. They wanted to protect their lives. They wanted to reduce casualties, so they carried these big shields. Macedon was a kingdom. It had subjects, not citizens, and although everyone went into battle with a little bit of alcohol in the ancient world, the Macedonians drank a lot of alcohol, and they were willing to accept casualties that Greeks of the city-states weren't. So what they did was they increased the size of the pike from 9 feet to 15 feet. It gave them an advantage because they were further away from the enemy. If you've got a 15-foot pike, you can't use one hand. You have to use 2 hands, which means you can't have a big shield around you can't have a big shield around. What the Greeks did was they held the shield in their left hand and they used the right hand overhand to use the pike. What the Macedonians do is, so they have this pike they're holding with 2 hands. The shield is around their neck on a thong. You can't have a big body shield on that when it's around your neck, because you'll fall over. So they have a smaller one. Very successful, small innovation. I could go on and on. There's lots of innovations over the years.
Well, that is interesting. Could you, in your book, Masters of Command, one of the points you make is that the area of logistics and supply is something that the good commanders understand, and that some are weak in that area. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. So
I think Caesar was the one that you commented that getting the material and so forth to where it was needed was an issue.
Yes. So when Caesar invaded North Africa, for instance, from Sicily, he had a lot of trouble getting the supplies to make the trip across sea. It was in the winter, and some of the ships were scattered, so that was difficult for him. I mentioned the case of Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. They've got nearly 200,000 men, soldiers and sailors in Greece. Greece is a poor country and it couldn't feed those men. So they need to have their supplies, this long, 1,000-mile long supply chain going all the way back to Egypt and to Antioch, Syria. And it's very vulnerable. They make the mistake of underestimating what the enemy can do in cutting off their supplies, and that turns out to be their Achilles heel. Anthony was a good enough general that he must have known. He couldn't have been ignorant of the importance of logistics, but he's willing to take a risk and to underestimate what the enemy can do. So the good generals in antiquity were well aware of the necessities of logistics, but they didn't always follow through on it.
Yes, I think your comment was that men plan, God laughs.
Yes,
which seems to make sense of that.
Yes.
Let me go back to the leadership question, and
Sure.
one of the points you made was that Julius Caesar is a tremendous politician.
Yes.
In the ancient world, politics and leadership and generalship, how important are they together as as a way of being that leader you needed to be?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. Thanks. You can't be a great leader in the ancient world without having communication skills and oratorical ability. You need to constantly be speaking to the army. It's not an accident that pre-battle harangues, as they're called, are a major part of ancient literature on warfare. You needed to know how to communicate with the men. It's often the case that great generals are also great politicians, but it's not always the case. So Hannibal is not such a great politician. Hannibal is a little bit like Douglas MacArthur in that he spends his career abroad. He doesn't come home very often. And we're not as well informed about this as we'd like to be by our sources, but it sure looks as if the home government just didn't give Hannibal the support that he wanted in his campaign in Italy, in part because they didn't trust him. They weren't sure that he wouldn't turn Victor around and march on them in Carthage. He would have been in much better position had he been a strong politician at home. There are also some examples from Athens of generals or admirals actually who do really well, but they don't have a political base at home. And so perhaps that keeps them from reaching the very top, absolute top position in their military career and not having the kind of assignments that they might have liked. But it's very important for ancient generals to be able to work the politics at home.
Maybe today as well.
Yeah, maybe.
As we wrap up, are there 2 or 3 things you would like people to take from this discussion that connect the past with the present?
Sure. One is that as we're just saying, the military is never completely separate from politics. Rarely, if ever, is a war entirely decided by military logic. The second is the enemy gets a vote, always. So Antony thought he had this great plan to win the war, but he simply underestimated what the enemy was going to do. And third, that part of the art of leadership is the art of having a good second in command and knowing how to work with that second in command. As I said, Augustus is one of the great examples in history of someone who wouldn't have succeeded without having a good second in command.
Good things to think about. Well, Dr. Strauss, thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us today. For feedback on this session or any Think JSOU activity, please contact us at thinkjsou@socom.mil. I'd like to close by once again encouraging everyone to explore the complete Think JSOU collection by subscribing through the library or on one of the social media channels on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or APAN. Additionally, the US SOCOM Library is an exceptional resource for checking out electronic books or to download past and present JSOU monographs through the JSOU Press. You can always check out upcoming courses and events on our website, which is www.socom.mil/JSOU. This series is brought to you by the Department of Strategic Studies of the Joint Special Operations University. Thank you all for watching. And Dr. Strauss, thank you very much for this morning.
It was a pleasure.